His name was Jonas Hubbard, and his father was Robert Hall Hubbard. Most of our other relatives had moved to Arkansas, so we didn't have a lot of cousins and kinfolks around. Seth and I worked like dogs around the farm, milking cows, chopping cotton, working in the garden, picking cotton. We were expected to work like grown men. It was a tough life, what with the Depression and all. But like they always said, the Depression didn't bother us in the South because we'd already been in one since the war. How much land? Lucian asked. We had 80 acres. It had been in the family for a long time. Most of it was in timber, but there was some farmland on grandfather, cotton and beans. And the Rhines family had the adjacent property. That's right. Sylvester. And there were some other Rhines there too. In fact, Seth and I played with a bunch of the Rhines kids from time to time. But always from Cleveland, wasn't it? Cleveland hated Sylvester. Hated all the Rhineses. It was a feud that had been boiling for a long time. You see, Sylvester owned 80 acres too, right next to our land, to the west of it. The Hubbards always felt as though that land belonged to them. According to Cleon, a man named Jeremiah Rhines took title to the property in 1870 during Reconstruction. Jeremiah had been a slave, then a freed slave, somehow purchased the land. I was just a kid and never really understood what happened back then. But the Hubbards always felt like it was their rightful land. I think they even went to court over it, but at any rate, it remained in the Rhines family. This infuriated Cleon because he had only 80 acres, but yet these black folks had the same. I remember hearing many times that the Rhineses were the only blacks in the county who owned their own land, and that they had somehow taken it from the Hubbards. Seth and I knew we were supposed to dislike the Rhines kids, but we usually had no one else to play with. We'd sneak off and go fishing and swimming with them. Toby Rhines was my age, and he was my buddy. Cleon caught Seth and me swimming off with the Rhineses and beat us until we couldn't walk. He was a violent man, Cleon. Vengeful, mean, filled with hatred, and with a quick temper. We were terrified. Because it was his third viewing that night, Jake didn't focus as hard. Instead, he watched the jurors. They were frozen, mesmerized, absorbing every word as if in disbelief. Even Frank Doley, Jake's worst juror, was leaning forward with an index finger, tapping his lips, thoroughly captivated. What happened to Sylvester? Lucian asked. Oh yes, that's what you want to hear. The feud got worse when some trees got cut near the property line. Cleon thought they were his trees. Sylvester was sure they were his. Because the boundary line had been disputed for so long, everybody knew exactly where it was. Cleon was ready to throw a basket. I remember him saying he'd put up with their crap for far too long, that it was time to do something. One night, some men came over and drank whiskey behind the barn. Seth and I sneaked out and tried to listen. They were planning something against the Rhines bunch. We couldn't tell exactly what it was, but it was obvious a plot was being hatched. Then one Saturday afternoon, we went to town. It was hot, August, I think, 1930, and everybody went to town on Saturday afternoon, blacks and whites. Everybody had to shop and stock up. Palmyra in those days was nothing but a farming village, but on Saturdays, it was packed. The stores and sidewalks were crowded. Seth and I didn't see anything, but later that night, we heard some kids talking about a black man who had said something smart to a white woman, and this had everybody upset. Then we heard that the black man was Sylvester Rhines. We rode home in the back of the truck with my parents and white, and we knew something was about to happen. You could just tell. When we got home, Cleon ordered us to go to our rooms and not to come out until he said so. Then we heard him arguing with our mother, the bad argument. I think he hit her. We heard him drive away in his truck. We pretended to be asleep, but we were outside in a flash. We saw the taillights of his truck headed west, towards Sycamore Road. Where was Sycamore Road? It's not there anymore, but in 1930, it was a small settlement on the Rhines land, near a creek. Just a few old houses scattered around, leftover slaves. That's where Sylvester lived. Anyway, Seth and I put a bridle on Daisy, the pony, took off bareback. Seth had the reins. I was holding on for dear life. But we rode bareback all the time. We knew what we were doing. When we got close to Sycamore Road, we saw the lights from some trucks. We got off and led Daisy through the woods. Then we tied her to a tree and left her. We went on, closer and closer, until we came places. We were on the side of a hill, and looking down, you could see 3 or 4 white men beating a black man with sticks. His shirt was off. His pants were off. It was Sylvester Rhines. His wife, Esther, was in front of their house, 50 yards or so away. And she was yelling, crying. She tried to get close, but one of the white men knocked her down. Seth and I got closer and closer until we were at the edge of the trees. We stopped there and watched and listened. Some more men showed up in another truck. They had a rope, and when Sylvester saw the rope, he went crazy. It took 3 or 4 of the white men to hold him down until they could bind his hands and legs. They dragged him over and shoved him up into the back of one of the trucks. "Where was your father?" Lucian asked. Ansel paused, took a deep breath, then rubbed his eyes. He continued. "He was there, sort of off to the side, watching it. They shot him. He was definitely part of the gang, but he didn't want to get his hands dirty. There were 4 trucks, and they drove slowly away from the sun, not far, to a row of sycamore trees. Seth and I knew the place well because we had fished in the creek. There were 5 or 6 tall sycamore trees in a perfect row, thus the name. There was an old story about an Indian tribe planting the trees as part of their pagan rituals, but who knows? The truck stopped at the first tree, made a semicircle, so there would be enough light. Seth and I had crept along in the woods. I didn't want to watch, and at one point I said, "Seth, let's get out of here." But I didn't move, and neither did he. It was too awful to walk away from. They strung the rope with a thick branch and wrestled the noose around Sylvester's neck. He was twisting, yelling, begging. "I ain't said nothing, Mr. Burt. I ain't said nothing. Please, Mr. Burt, you know I ain't said nothing." A couple of them yanked the other end of the rope and almost pulled his head off. Lucian asked, "Who was Mr. Burt?" Ansel took another deep breath and stared at the camera in a long, awkward pause. Finally he said, "You know that